Good evening, this is the Gravelly Hill Online Ward Forum, and my name's Councillor Mick Brown, and I'm the Councillor for Gravelly Hill. I've got 6 guests with me tonight, which are John Mole, Dr Justin Varney, Mohammed Khan, Doug Lee, Carl Randall and Mark Wollenscroft. Just need to give a couple of notices, the first of which is that this meeting is being held in public and a recording will be available for public future use. And we've got 3 reports to be presented tonight by city officers and invited guests who are representing their departments. The first subject on the agenda is the A38 Tyburn Road, and we've got contributions from Doug Lee, a representative from Traffic and the Clean Air, and Carl Randall, the local senior highways engineer. So I've got questions for a number of the people on the planning section. Do you want me to read the questions first? Yes.
Councillor Brown, Dr Varney's been able to join us now, so would you like to go back to the original agenda?
Okay, are we happy with that, everybody? We're going to go back to the original agenda. So thank you, Justin, for joining us tonight to give us a public health update on the coronavirus situation in the city and in Gravelly Hill in particular. So thank you.
No problem, Councillor, and apologies for being a couple of minutes late. I'm sure everyone will understand it is challenging times at the moment on this. So I'll talk a little bit about where we are in terms of the overall picture at the moment. I'll touch briefly on testing, a little bit on vaccination, although vaccination is led by the NHS, and then I'll talk at the end specifically about what we're seeing in Gravelly at the moment in terms of the picture and the pattern of the spread in the ward. So overall, what we're seeing is that the case numbers in all ages in Birmingham have started to stabilise. That is a reflection of the impact of the national lockdown. What I think is concerning at the moment is they are stabilising rather than seeing rapid fall. And what we're seeing across the country is some variation. So London and the southeast, which went into tier 4 restrictions, those much stricter restrictions before Christmas, are coming down much faster than areas like Birmingham that didn't and were in lighter levels of restriction, although I know it still felt quite restricted up until the national lockdown. And therefore our rate of descent also, sorry, our lockdown period also coincided with the new variant arriving in the city. So unfortunately, what's happened is London locked down faster, but the new variant had already got out and was starting to grow in the West Midlands, and then by the time we locked down it had already spread, and that we're seeing it, not just here but also in the East Midlands and to some extent in the North East and North West and Yorkshire and Humber. And our case rate up to the 16th of January, which is the most accurate recent data, is putting us at 706 cases per 100,000. And that's about a 10% decrease on the previous 7 days. So there is good sign that is coming down. What is worrying, however, is that our case rate in our over 60s is not coming down as fast. And we're now seeing a case rate in the over 60s, which is sitting at around 625 cases per 100,000. And if we compare that to about a week ago, that was sitting at around 658. So there's been some decline, but it's fluctuating and it has gone up and down over the last couple of days. And that is concerning because we know that the case rate in the over 60s and the rates of hospitalisation and really do link very closely to each other. So we really want to see that case rate coming down much more impressively. Just to put it in perspective, when we came out of the November lockdown, our case rate was less than 200 cases per 100,000. So we are a very long way off that at the moment, unfortunately. So I'll move on to talk about testing, where we are on testing. So the new test that's been brought along is the lateral flow test. And the lateral flow test is the same swab to the back of your nose, back of your throat, but instead of sending it off to the lab, you go at a test centre, it gets mixed with some liquid, drop it onto a little plastic kit, and I'll just show one to the camera so you can see that. It looks a bit like a pregnancy test, and you put the little droplets in here, and then you have to read it in a 5-minute window between 25 minutes and 30 minutes. If you read it too early or too late, it's inaccurate, because unfortunately the lines, unlike a pregnancy test where they stick around, on this one they disappear. So there are some challenges with using it, which is why we ask people to go to a testing site rather than giving it to them at home to use. Now, the difference between the lateral flow test and the PCR test, the one that goes off to the laboratory, is the PCR test, obviously fancy machines in the laboratory, very good at finding the virus. So PCR says, are you infected or not? The lateral flow, which is just this little bit of plastic with some special paper, is very good when there's lots of virus in the back of your nose and the back of your throat. So it's great at finding out, are you infectious? But not so good if you're in your early stages of your infection or the late stages of your infection. So this is a test for infectiousness, whereas the PCR is a test for whether you're infected or not. And what we're using lateral flow for is to encourage people who haven't got symptoms but aren't able to work from home, or if you're in a support bubble, to test regularly. Every 3 to 4 days, you should be going to a testing site to get a lateral flow test done. And that's because it's very good at finding people who haven't got any symptoms but are infectious. And we know about 1/3 of people haven't got any symptoms and are infectious. When we did this, we launched it, you'll know, at the National Indoor Arena just before Christmas. In the week before Christmas, we tested well over 1,000 people. Just under 2% of people were positive. And on the day I went to visit the site, we'd found 17 people who didn't have symptoms who were positive. And although they were really upset that their Christmas wasn't going to be the way they'd planned, they were also incredibly grateful, because all of them turned around and said, I was going to go and have lunch with my gran or my mother and they're vulnerable, and I would have given them COVID. And now you've stopped me doing that. So really think about lateral flow is helping you to identify, are you infectious and you just don't know it, as a way of kind of giving that extra bit of safety. It's not perfect. No test is perfect. So even if it's negative, it doesn't mean you can go and give granny a hug, but it does give you that extra bit of confidence. So if you are in a support bubble, let's say you do your shopping for your mum once a week, go and get a lateral flow test before you go to the shops, and it will just give you that extra bit of reassurance that you're not giving a COVID along with the shopping on the day you're popping in. So lots of lateral flow testing sites across the city. We're opening up a whole load of pharmacies where there are appointments. We've got mobile sites. There's one now in the Castle Vale Stadium. And you can also turn up between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening at the utility arena without an appointment. The other ones you've got to book, but the utility arena you can pop down without an appointment and just turn up. Takes about half an hour to do the test, from when you walk in to when you walk out, and you get the result within 24 hours. Most people get the result within about half an hour of doing the test itself, but sometimes there is a computer glitch at the centre. Okay, so vaccination now. Vaccines are being rolled out by the NHS. It is going as fast as possible to put vaccine into the arms of the people who need it most to stop them dying or ending up in hospital. So there's a national committee called the Joint Committee for Vaccine and Immunisation. They make a decision about how vaccines should be used, and they've looked at all the evidence and they've set out 9 priority groups, and they're basically based on age, working backwards from the over 85s down, and then the people who are clinically extremely vulnerable. And then there's an additional group for people who work in health and social care, who work directly with those most vulnerable people. And the reason this approach is being taken is we know from when you get the first jab of the vaccine, it massively reduces your chances of dying if you catch COVID. Now, we also know it's not great at stopping you catching COVID, which is why it's really important, if you've had the vaccine, the first dose, you can't abandon all your risk management. You still have to keep your social distance. You can't go and hug the grandkids, I'm afraid. But it does give you that reassurance that if you do catch COVID, you really won't end up in hospital. It's a massive reduction. And we know that if you're over 80, your chances of dying if you catch COVID are 300 times higher than if you're age 30. So it's a massive difference.
A massive difference, yeah.
The second dose is the bit that kind of locks in your protection. So with the Pfizer jab, after the first dose, you get about 50% protection. Now that's enough to keep you out of hospital and stop you dying, but it might not stop you catching it. After the second dose, it's about 95%. Now, because we've only got a limited amount of the vaccine, the government's made the decision that it's better to give more people that 50% protection and stop them dying and ending up in hospital than only give half the amount of people more protection and leave half with none. So that's why it's being done the way it's being done. People will be getting letters if they're in the priority groups to invite them to go to the Millennium Point, which is the mass vaccination centre. Or if you don't want to do that because it's not easy to get to, there is free parking though. I should plug that. That's something the council's done to help make this easier. If you don't want to do that, sit tight. You will get another letter from your GP practice about where it's being done locally. And the GPs are clubbing together, so it won't be necessarily at your practice, but it'll be one in a reasonable distance. If you're housebound, there is a special service which starts this week for people that are housebound, and they'll get a different letter from their GP about how it's going to be set up for them. But we haven't forgotten you. It is in track. So that's probably all I should say on vaccination. So let me finish by just giving you a little bit on Gravelly Hill itself and what we're seeing in terms of your local data. So the case rate, the most recent case rate, and I sent this through to Councillor Brown yesterday, I think it was, is around 844 cases per 100,000 for the population in the ward. That's kind of stuck at the moment. When I look at where you are, you're not coming down and you're not really going up particularly. And I think that's one of the frustrations, is that many parts of the city are stuck at the moment rather than starting to come down. So it does reflect we've got more to do. The majority of cases we're seeing, let me just get it up in front of me again. So the highest case rate we've got is in the 30 to 39-year-old population. And the case rate in that age group is 1,693 cases per 100,000. So much, much higher. In comparison, the case rate in the over 80s is only 320 per 100,000. And that's the lowest of all age groups. So in your ward, this is very much a disease that's spreading predominantly in your 20 to 40-year-old population. That's where most of the cases are. And it's very, in terms of ethnicity, it's very mixed between Asian and the Asian and the white community in terms of numbers. I mean, pretty much neck and neck, I think, in reality. When I look at the outbreaks on the ward in terms of the clusters, so these are settings like schools and care homes where we see numbers of cases. There are a few in schools in the ward and in education settings. But actually, when I looked in those in more detail for you, they're almost all teachers or adult staff. They're not students. And we're seeing that as a common pattern across the city, about 2.5 times more cases in staff than there are in students in schools. And they're not really catching it in school. It's to do with how teachers lead their lives outside. In the ward, there were 33 clusters over the last week in households. That means houses with more than 2 cases of COVID in the same house. The average size of the household is 2, and that's pretty average for the city actually. And the largest single cluster we've got in any one house is 7 people. The majority of the transmission we're seeing in the ward is between household members and linked to workplaces, but there isn't a single employer, so I can't say it's this supermarket or this factory or this employer that's driving it in the ward. It's, you know, it's small clusters in lots of places, but that household transmission is really loud and clear for the ward. So the final things I want to say is it's great we've got 6 COVID community champions in the ward. The top in the city at the moment, I think, is 29 champions, and that's, I'm afraid, in a much smaller ward than yours. So I think really encourage people to sign up through the council website to become COVID community champions. We're laying on a vaccination training programme for the champions so that they really do get kind of boots and braces information about what the vaccine is, some of the truth to rebut some of the myths that are going on. So really encourage people to sign up. And Councillor Brown's also got some more information that I'm sure he'll be sharing with the ward to send out around where you can get financial support if you're isolating, and also obviously where the local LFD sites are. So I think, you know, as a ward, you're going well. We need to bring those numbers down more, and I think the focus is very much that 20 to 40 age group, those working age adults, and really focusing on getting things right in the workplace as well as at home. I know there's been a huge amount of information there, Councillor, but I'm happy to take any questions that you have for me.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Justin. That was really, really appreciated, and I find it was really valuable. You've already touched on some of the questions that I've had sort of emailed through to me. One of them was actually to the council's, get onto it through the council's website address. But people who get online communication difficult, is there a phone number people can use if they wish to become a community champion? And if so, are you aware of it?
So at the moment we're doing it through the website. What I would say is if people aren't able to access digitally, if they ring the contact centre, so that's the normal helpline you ring for the council, and say you want to register as a COVID champion, they'll take your details and they'll take your contact number and they'll pass it through to my team, who can then follow up with you. We do, most of the training we do for the COVID champions is online, but we're also working with some of our community partners to set up a telephone tree system. And that I think will be really helpful for COVID champions that find telephone much easier than using some of the digital stuff. So that's in development, but if you are interested, please ring the contact centre and just leave your details, and one of my team will get back in touch with you and help you get linked in.
Okay, thank you for that. The second question was in terms of Dr. Varney, can you indicate where people can go to actually get a test in close to Gravelly Hill? Now, I think this is the one on Castle Vale Stadium and one in Erdington at the moment.
Yeah, so the Castle Vale Stadium site is one for people who haven't got symptoms, and that just opened up on Monday. That's one of our mobile units. It moves around. It can do about 200 tests a day. So there's quite a lot, but you do need to book an appointment through the council website, and there is a telephone number if you can't work the booking form. The Erdington site is for people who've got symptoms. So right. That's the important one. The Erdington site's a symptomatic one. We have got pharmacies coming on board. I don't know from memory, I haven't learnt where they all are yet, but the details are on the website and they're broken down by ward. So if you go on the website, actually, I'll just look for you now and see whether it's any of the ones in Gravelly have come online. On the website, it's got all the details about the opening hours of the Castle Vale site. It's generally 10 till 2 and 4 till 8. So they do like a late shift at these sites. And then the pharmacy sites are usually 6 days a week. Let's see what would be near to you. Don't think yet we've got any of the Gravelly ones have gone live yet. No, they haven't. So okay. At the moment, there's stuff. Neachels is probably a bit far. There's quite a lot in Hall Green and Acox, but again, that's the other side of the city from you. And there's some stuff in Aston and Witton, which wouldn't be too far, I don't think. But keep an eye, because there are new ones opening up every day, because we're training them in batches. We've had 100 pharmacies volunteer. So we've trained 40 of them last week and another 40 this week. So do keep checking the website.
Okay, thank you for that. Then the third question is, Dr. Varney, what are the two main things you would advise people to do to help to stop the spread of COVID? If you could only do two things, what would the two main ones be?
Well, I'll cheat. The first one is follow the rules, because they're really important. But if I had to pick one rule, wash your hands. Wash your hands. One of the things that we forget, I think, as we've gone through this, is that one of the main ways we contract COVID is we touch something that someone else has breathed on or coughed on, and we transfer the virus onto our face, and we touch our face. And the virus, it can't burrow through our skin, but it can crawl across our face. So washing your hands breaks that, particularly if you've been out shopping. When you come in, wash your hands. If you're handling the post, wash your hands after you've done that. That really makes a difference. The second thing is I would ask everyone to go on to germdefence.org. Germdefence.org is a website that's been set up to help people in households reduce the risk of spread in the household. And as I said, we've 33 households in Gravely where you've got multiple cases of COVID in the last week. And if you use that website, it really helps you think through all the simple things that you don't think about, like actually staggering meal times to protect the most vulnerable in the family, those kind of things. So wash your hands and have a look at germdefence.org would be my two top ones, I think, today.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Then the last question is the COVID situation. It's about air pollution, and why is public health not treated air pollution as a public health emergency?
Yeah, so the council established its Brum Breathes board to take a holistic approach to air pollution in the city, because the council actually has really recognised that air pollution does affect people's lives. It is costing lives in the city, and public health's part of that. That was all established before I joined. Councillor Brown will remember, it's coming up to my 2-year anniversary now of joining the city. I only came back in 2019 in February. And bluntly, since I've been arrived, I've had some time, and then we've had COVID, but I have created a new post in my team for an assistant director for environmental public health and health protection. I've just finished the appointment process, and I hope the lady that we've offered it to will accept the job. And that was really in recognition that actually public health needs to be stronger on things like air pollution, climate change, planning in the built environment, and I didn't have enough capacity within my team to do that before. So I've created a new post. That person I hope will be in the next couple of months, and I'd be happy to come back in the autumn when hopefully things with COVID have calmed down a bit, or send that post holder to come and talk to the ward forum about what public health is going to do and our role in terms of responding to the challenge of air pollution in the city, because it is a serious issue. But I just haven't had capacity to be able to respond to it, and I've created someone's job so that they will be able to moving forward.
Well, that's really good to hear, and I certainly think we'll be looking forward to either inviting yourself or your new colleague to a ward meeting in the autumn to discuss that, because air pollution is a major issue for a lot of people in Gravelly Hill Ward. But thank you very much, Dr. Varney, for your contributions. That has been it's been really helpful. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you all again.
Yeah. Okay. Right, so I think the second section we've got on here now is for the A38 Tyburn Road, and we've got contributions from Doug Lee, Paul Randall, the traffic and the clean air zone. So anybody particularly want to go first on that?
Could Doug Lee and Mark and Mohammed put their microphones on, please?
Right, so Doug's on first, yeah?
Yeah, if that's agreeable, councillor. Can you hear me?
I can do. Right. There's a question that's come up. Why are we still being polluted by BSF when planning permission was not granted? And I have an answer to that question here. On the 20th of January, notice was served on all parties requiring cessation of use at the site. On the 22nd of February, that notice will become effective unless the developer actually appeals. Now, I've actually put a notification around addresses on the Tyburn Road specifically regarding the BSF site, so people are aware that when the compliance date, which is the 28th of April, comes forward, if no appeal's been received, then the business should actually cease. But as I've said to residents in the area, under the current legislation, the BSF site does have the capacity to appeal to central government to reconsider the decision that was actually made. So that was the answer to that question. Okay, so in terms of are you going to go first then, Doug?
Yes, if that's agreeable, Councillor.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, going back to 428 Tyburn Road and the Builders' Yard, they could have appealed against the original planning refusal, which they haven't done. So now we've served the enforcement notice, and as you quite rightly say, it becomes effective in 1 month. They then have 2 months to comply with the notice, which essentially means that they have to cease the use as a builder's yard and a garden centre and restore the land to its previous condition. So it's obviously something that's very high on our agenda, and I'll make sure that enforcement are on top of it going forward.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Doug. But Dave Hill, from the Senior Enforcement Officer, was in touch with me at the beginning of this week to run through what the actual process was. So I'm certainly aware that as of the 20th, which would be yesterday, the notice was actually served on all parties to instigate the ceasing of doing business there. So I can assure residents that process is actually legally commenced.
Yeah, I agree. It's the process afterwards. Turning to the A38, then obviously, it's clearly a very busy road. It's an interesting road because obviously on one side you've got the residential properties to the north, and to the south you've got one of the city's established industrial areas, and that can obviously cause conflicts. In terms of general planning policy, we do promote public transport. We're promoting low emission vehicles. We're taking forward things like the Brum Breathes initiative, and also the route to zero, to move the city to zero carbon processes. So from a planning viewpoint, what I was going to maybe suggest was that we could maybe, when the time allows, have a site visit down the Tyburn Road to see if there are any particular uses down the road that are of particular concern to the residents, such as obviously 428 Tyburn Road, which we've talked about already, and that's one of the things we could maybe do to see if there's a sort of a suite of actions that come out of that. In terms of what other controls we have going forward, obviously with normal planning applications, we can put on planning conditions that restrict hours of delivery and things like that, and we can also put in place construction management plans, which sets out how they should service sites. So we do have a suite of controls we can potentially use through planning conditions. Sometimes, obviously, you're clearly aware, we do have to enforce those, and it can be a difficult process. The other area where, obviously, we've shared with you where we do have, I suppose, lorries coming through the area is in response to HS2, which obviously is to the south of Tyburn. One of the particular areas of activity is the Washwood Heath area, where their rolling stock maintenance depot is proposed. So in terms of consents under the HS2 regime, they already have a lot of the approvals in place because HS2 was approved through an Act of Parliament that received royal assent in February 2017. But we do then have areas that they do have to submit information to us under a process called Schedule 17 applications. So that can cover things like buildings, landscaping, bringing into use of sites, and also lorry routes. So we do get lorry route applications. However, I have to be honest with you and say that, you know, we don't really have a great deal of scope sometimes to refuse those, even if we might like to. So we, in terms of that, what they have to do is their requirement is that they had established lorry routes set out in the HS2 Act that were then considered through HS2's environmental statement. And one of those routes is from junction 6 of the M6 along Tyburn Road and then back down towards the A47 and down to the Washwood Heath site. One of the more recent applications we've got for those sort of lorry routes relates to a proposed replacement rail bridge to the north of Aston Church Road. It's where the Aston-Stetchford railway line goes over the Birmingham to Derby line, and because HS2 also follows that rail corridor, they have to increase the height of the rail bridge. So in effect, Network Rail have to build a new railway bridge. And one of the applications we've got is whereby the construction site is serviced along the Tyburn Road route, and in part that does involve some sort of large parts of the bridge structure coming down at certain times down the motorway network from Bolton. We have approached HS2 in this instance about looking at alternative routes in terms of could you split the traffic with junction 5 on the M6. In this case, because it was all coming from the Bolton area, they said they can't really do that. And obviously there are difficulties with junction 5 because you can only get off it going north and you can only get onto the M6 going south. So in this case, probably, you know, we'll be trying to encourage them to use alternative routes where possible. But it was something that they, you know, despite the issues that you raised and we raised, that we couldn't successfully achieve at this time. That's not to say that going forward in terms of some of these HS2 applications, because there's likely to be more, I think what we should do is have a structured process in place now to approach them about making sure that lorry routes and the distribution of traffic is split between junction 5 and junction 6 if it's coming up, well, it's all coming off the motorway network. So that's one of the things we were seeking to do, and we were seeking to work with HS2 to try and achieve that.
Yeah.
So in this instance, unfortunately, we haven't been able to quite do that, but I think it's something that we want to keep pressing with HS2. They are obviously, you know, being a sort of quasi-public body, probably. I'm not saying that private sector developers don't do this, but HS2 have certain standards that they put on their contractors. So they're all required to use the European sort of 6 diesel engines in terms of the lorries that are used. So that, you know, would be beneficial for air quality. And also, you know, the sort of set working hours, Monday to Friday, and then Saturday with no working Sunday. So, you know, there are, you know, it's not as difficult as it could have been, but we didn't quite achieve what we wanted to do when we first started discussing that application. So I suppose in summary, from the planning point of view, obviously there's a big concern about the volume of traffic and the air quality along that corridor, which, you know, will be picked up upon by the Birmingham Breathes initiatives and things like that. But probably at the local level, there's probably an agenda for us to try and work with HS2 and press our case about trying to split traffic between motorway junctions, and then secondly, the proposal that maybe we establish a little working group to look at some of the issues that people have raised along this stretch of Tyburn Road from a planning point of view.
I think that would be really good. Now, I've got a number of questions which relate to Tyburn Road and in terms of the traffic on pollution related issues. So I wonder, is it worthwhile if Paul does his piece and then we get the clean air zone and anybody else who's looking to speak on Tyburn Road to do their presentations, and then I'll put the questions together and then people can answer them as they feel is appropriate. Would that work for people?
Yeah, that works for me, Councillor.
Okay. I mean, this. So, who wants to go next?
Carl?
Carl, you're going to go next?
Yes, I can do. Thank you.
So, if you give us an update in terms of issues that you've currently got on Tyburn Road, things that you think are of concern.
Okay. Specifically on Tyburn Road, obviously we've got other things going on in Gravelly Ward that I can report on either now or a little bit later, highway related. But specifically for Tyburn Road, the sort of issues we've been getting relate to parking and relate strongly to the faded markings that were put on the footway along Tyburn Road quite some years ago as part of the red route introduction and the bus lane. What this was, it was a legal order, unusually, but allowing parking on the footway in the marked bays. And over many years, the bays have faded and hadn't been maintained. So people's parking had lost some discipline. They were parking where they thought best, sometimes blocking driveways or accesses, and sometimes causing an issue to other neighbours. And we've also had an issue with some residents that were parked on the footway issued with penalty charge notices from NSL, who are our parking enforcement contractors. So we've had a look at the traffic regulation along there. Councillor Brown has raised a number of issues with me and brought to our attention a number of penalty charge notices that were issued. I've raised this with Kia Highways, who are our interim service provider for highways, and asked them to repaint the markings that had faded or disappeared in line with the traffic regulation order, the legal order that says where parking is permitted. That in the main, if not wholly, has been done now. It commenced in December. It paused a bit over Christmas. It obviously pauses when there's some inclement weather, rain, sleet or snow. And I believe most, if not all, the sections have been repainted now. So hopefully that'll, delineate where people can and should park on the footway where it's legally permitted. We had many issues raised about the condition, the surface condition of Tyburn Road, relating to potholes, issues with tyres and whatever associated with the poor condition. We had Amy at the ward committee at the time, who noted all of this with us, and some safety critical defects were fixed. But again, I believe very recently some long sections of Tyburn Road have now been resurfaced, and it's in a lot better condition. We have regular complaints of speeding on Tyburn Road. It's a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. Some people exceed this. And so as part of this year's Gravelly Ward Minor Transport Measures funding, amongst some other schemes, Councillor Brown has agreed to the installation of a speed sign on the intercity side of Tyburn Road, just after the junction of Jarvis Way, the main entrance to the industrial estate, and that sign, a speed indicator, it will light up 40, and if you're going 40 or below, it will thank you. I'm not too sure what it says. I can't remember if you exceed it, but hopefully that will remind and advise people of the speed limit, and there'll also be a 40 painted on the road. I think a lot of people are aware of the speed limits and often choose to go faster. We have noticed, especially during COVID, with the large reduction in traffic on the roads, that some of those motorists are now going a lot faster than perhaps they used to, purely because of such a reduction in volume. They're both able to speed and they feel they can be because there's fewer other motorists. The speed sign, it isn't a gatso, it isn't a cash cow, it doesn't follow up with a penalty charge notice or fixed penalty fine. It's a reminder, it's a traffic safety sign. It will give us volume and speed data, but it's a reminder to motorists. Now, we know that the driver will often know what speed they're doing, but the passenger may not, or the people in the back may not, the husband or the wife or the children may not, and then they'll hopefully see the sign flash and then say something to the driver, you're speeding, slow down. Hopefully, I think the industry experts estimate it can bring speed down by between 6 and 8%. So hopefully that will make a difference. So specifically for Tyburn Road, they're the issues that I can report on.
Okay. There's a question come through in terms of accidents in the area. Do you think there's been a higher percentage of accidents on Tyburn Road at the moment, or people just possibly more hypersensitive to them?
Yes, I mean, it would be the type of road with the amount of junctions, the amount of signals, and the speed of the road. It is going to have an injury collision history to it. What it is or whether it's gone up, I don't know, and that is purely because while we regularly check the collision database, we tend to do it where we have concerns, where we have regular collisions, requests for traffic calming, requests for crossing facilities. Then, as part of the investigation, we do look at historic speed checks. We look at the previous collision history, injury collision history. It has to be injuries. There's no record or monitoring of damage only. So we simply cannot count that or monitor it because insurance companies aren't required to report it to the police. So it tends to be the overarching road safety team will monitor the sort of the bigger numbers. For example, we are trying to work up a scheme on Wood End Road. I believe that was 16 or 19 injury collisions over a 2-3 kilometre stretch of road. So we have what we call the local safety schemes. They are citywide schemes, but to qualify under that, unfortunately, because some roads are pretty poor, you do tend to find that these roads or 2-3 kilometre section of road does need to have, unless it has 15-20 injury collisions, then you're always going to have other roads with that or worse. And so the limited funding, which is a lot of money, it can be $500,000 or more, that limited funding has to then go to the roads of highest priority to reduce the greatest number of injury collisions that we can. So it could be in Wheelie Castle, it could be in Bartley Green, it could be in Erdington, it could be in Gravelly. We've 2,500 kilometres of roads. The chances of it being on a section that we're talking about, is perhaps slim, but then that's a good thing. If there haven't been, I mean, if there was any specific requests to have a look at a particular location, then we can do that. We wouldn't just routinely know the details for, you know, for all locations and all roads.
I've got a question that's coming here, which may actually be one that Doug could respond on. And it's a question that I discussed with you previously, Doug, about where the HGV vehicles for HS2 couldn't use the spine road.
We did, as you're aware,
raise we flagged up with them, wasn't it?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that, Councillor.
That's a question that we actually asked them, wasn't it?
It was. And they came back to your good self saying that they couldn't look at it because it wasn't something that had been considered through the environmental appraisal. So it was outside the scope of the appraisal and therefore the Act. So they were sort of limited in that respect. Maybe it's a question for them going forward, is could we look at that? I know they said it was going to be expensive, but I do think maybe, you know, if we have a dialogue with them at a higher level, that it might be something that we should keep asking about, because, you know, from our side, we thought there was, you know, there was certainly value in looking at it, certainly.
Yeah.
And maybe it's, you know, something that we involve Carl with as well in terms of, you know, what's possible down there, because, you know, there's going to be other conflicts going that way, but it's certainly worth looking at again. Yeah,
because there are a number of issues that relate to that particular stretch of the Tyburn Road, and they're not necessarily just one particular thing. It is a question in terms of the pollution levels, both noise and air pollution. It's a question of the speeding, it's a question of the road surface, it's a question of the times that vehicles are on the road, because vehicles are on that road for significant parts of the day and night now. And I know that speeding, as another resident has just said here, is it's a day and night issue now. One question that's come through is a bit of a multi-part question, is in terms of people there's an assumption that people are not enforcing planning and in environmental issues in the area, and the area's been allowed to deteriorate. And I don't think that's a conscious decision on anybody's part. I think it's a sort of a cumulative effect of a number of things that have come together. Does anybody have any comments in terms of what we can actually do to make it just a more environmentally friendly area? So if you want to catch the bus, you can do that easy without lorries coming charging past you, and people were parking on footpaths, parking across on illegal signage areas, and just a general lack of consideration for the people who are living in the area. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on those points.
Sorry, it's Doug, Councillor. I think that there's probably two sides to it. One's the sort of promotional side in terms of promoting alternatives, you know, to the private car and such forth. But also, I suppose it's, you know, looking at what powers we do have, you know, collectively between us, whether it be planning powers, whether it be police powers, whether it be transportation powers. And then, you know, maybe going back to what I said before, maybe looking at the area in a focused way and seeing if by applying all those powers we do have, we can maybe achieve more by working together. I know in the past, Carl and I have worked up around the Jaguar plant when there were lots of issues around sort of inconsiderate parking and, you know, the workforce parking in the Castle Vale residential areas and stuff. And so it wasn't an easy process, but by working with the factory and the management there, you know, we gradually managed to address those issues. So there's probably not an easy answer to it, but it's probably, you know, focusing on the area maybe. I don't know if Carl would agree.
Absolutely. We had about a 6 weekly meeting, didn't we? Yeah. An hour or so on an evening at the JLR Castle Bromwich plant, and what we were able to do was bring the issues to the table for us all to discuss. People who looked after Castle Vale and the tenants that attend, JLR management, the parking security would attend, plant managers, and we was able to practically eradicate the parking on the residential streets by JLR staff, even though it wasn't strictly illegal for the staff to park in some of the streets. There wasn't resident only parking, and as long as I wasn't on yellow lines and in breach of the restrictions. But to be a good neighbour, JLR didn't want their staff parking in these residential roads, which aren't the biggest road, and were then competing for the same spaces as the actual residents. And there was no excuse for the parking, because every member of staff is issued with a pass for one of the different car parks in the area. What it was come spill out time, when many hundreds of people exit. The one who could cross the road really quick and get to his car was the first one away, compared to walking up to the multi-storey or one of the other car parks. So we was able to work with Castle Vale and have registrations. It can be a little bit obvious who's a JLR worker, depending on what they're wearing and the regular pattern. And JLR took such a stance, they actually went through a HR process to take issue, and ultimately you could be dismissed if you repeatedly parked in this manner, even though highway wise it wasn't an offence. So you can have a good working relationship when you engage.
Yeah. Can I add a question here coming through about the speed limit on Tyburn Road? What's the possibility of it being reduced potentially to 30 miles an hour?
It can, is a simple answer. It can, and many other roads I have reduced. I don't countless number of roads over the years. There has to be a case for it. There has to be the funding for it. We look at a number of things. We look at the suitability. Is a road suitable at 40? Should it be 30 in a higher residential densely populated section? Then the manual streets will say perhaps it should be a 30 road. So it can be done. Obviously the process for it involves quite some consultation. The emergency services as key stakeholders, police, fire, ambulance, NHS, Hauliers Association, Taxi Association. There's many consultees, not least the residents and the businesses themselves in that area. Can be a very long process, because, as I say, we're consulting with everybody, and everybody has a view, quite rightly, for or against, and they all have to be listened to. There has to be the funding for it. Every sign has to be removed, every sign has to be changed. 30s have to go up wherever the road goes from a 20 to a 30, or from a 40 to a 30. So it's quite an exercise. We look at the speeds, we look at the volume, and we look at the injury collisions, and then a decision can be made. As we speak, we are reducing Chester Road, not too far from yourselves, from Orphanage Road. We are reducing Chester Road from 40, from Orphanage Road right the way down through Erdington and Castle Vale. So it can be done. I think that was about £10,000. It's not cheap. There's, as I say, legal processes, consultation, right of objection, adverts in the press. The bottom line is, yes, it can be done.
But that's something we could possibly have a meeting. I could talk to you about outside this meeting and then feed back to that particular residence.
Absolutely, yeah? Yes.
Okay. Then there's another quote come through here about the road markings that you got painted up on Tyburn Road for the parking bays. Apparently at B24 8HD, it's apparently still really faded.
Okay, it's as I say, it is a rolling program. Yes. If Leslie perhaps could maybe make a note of the address, I can liaise with Kia Highways. It is a rolling program. I was notified several times of the progress. I'm not sure if it's complete or not, but if there are areas that are faded, two things. One, the civil enforcement are unable to enforce if the markings are significantly faded, and two, people may inadvertently receive a penalty charge notice if they're parking where they know they can, but the markings are so faded that enforcement didn't know, which has happened recently. So it's in everybody's interest to have it visible.
Okay, there's another question here coming through, possibly both for Carl and Doug, in terms of speeding. There's a number of people have flagged up the issue that they feel that sometimes HGV drivers are speeding. So I think what we need to do is to see what we can do, possibly in terms of the HS2 traffic, to making sure if they are using Tyburn Road, they're sticking to the speed limits. If that's something we can actually pick up with HS2, Doug? Yeah,
there's a code of construction practice, so they should be behaving responsibly, and we're assured by HS2 that they'll enforce that. They're also required to identify the lorries in some way so that it's part of the HS2 construction program. So if there is somebody doing something that they shouldn't be doing, if it's a HS2 lorry, we should be able to identify it and then obviously raise it locally with HS2, because obviously the main construction offices are at Snow Hill, so it's we do have the local contacts.
And Doug, sorry, Councillor, if I can just add to that particular point. It's Mo here, the traffic officer. I deal quite closely with HS2, just to say that as well as the requirements for HS2 vehicles to be identified, they are also fitted with trackers. So each individual lorry movement that's made by a HS2 vehicle has to be tracked. And as well as obviously speed, the route is also picked up by that tracking system. And as part of that route, it ensures compliance with the Schedule 17 process that they go through to ensure that they're not deviating from or using alternative routes that are not covered by the agreements that they have. So if there is any allegation or any query, then we can certainly look through that, as like I say, all of their vehicle movements will be tracked on a central database. Okay, well, thank you for that, Mohammed. There's another question come through regarding a potentially dangerous pedestrian crossing on the bottom of Wheelwright Road. So possibly, Carl, is that something that would come within your remit to have a look at?
What's the question, Councillor, or the issue?
It's apparently one resident flagged up an issue of a dangerous pedestrian crossing on Wheelwright Road, which I assume is the one towards the bottom.
Yeah, so said what the danger is. Is it the timings or the length of the timings, or?
It's not entirely clear, but it may have been there's an issue in terms of something in terms of the actual buttons on the system on the crossing. Yeah, but I'll see if I can get some more clarification from them in terms of that, and then let you know. But if you could drop me an email on that, I can certainly get it investigated. Yeah, and then it's about people on the bottom of Wheelwright Road parking on double yellow lines, which I suppose is a perennial problem. Yes, I mean, civil enforcement officers, they do patrol on a regular basis. We know that because of the penalty charge notices recently issued on Tyburn Road, which, as soon as they're issued, you receive the complaints, and I do. So we know they're in the area. We know on a regular basis they monitor. A slight problem with double yellow lines. Obviously, the people have to be seen at the time. There's the observation period the officers have to give, and a motorist, if he's anywhere near, will simply drive away as soon as they can. Obviously, blue badge holders, if they've parked safely, even on double yellow lines, can park for up to 3 hours. I think really it's probably a case of reporting it as and when it occurs, and then perhaps NSL can step up the patrols if it's an area of particular concern. Okay, thank you for that, Carl. Again, we've got another question which I think will probably be coming to you again. So in respect of parking, It is unlawful to block public access and drive off the curb, but highway department vehicles, according to this resident, are doing this daily and also through the night. So I think the question is, why are they actually doing it, or why are they being allowed to get away with it? And if it's highways department vehicles, who can we take that up with in terms of making sure they're more considerate of people in the community?
Okay, we have had this before. The blocking of an access to obstruct an access, as in you cannot get on or off. Sometimes we have, partial obstruction, which is a nuisance or inconvenience. But if it's actually obstructed, that you cannot get on or off, then it is an offence, and the City Council's parking enforcement team can take action, and so can the police. The police would tend not to, they would refer to the council, but the police can, is a bottom line. As for who is doing it, we have had some of the refuge vehicles on the FA, not too far from your ward. And what we say there is the City Council livery is identified. Fleet and waste vehicles will have normally a 4-digit number, 4609, a 4-digit number. They'll be specifically identifiable, either that or the registration number. And as I have had to do in the past, unfortunately, I can write to the managers, give them the details. A photograph says 1,000 things, ideally. Occasionally it can be a highway service provider, and again I can go to the transport manager and raise this with them. And as Mohammed has said, most if not all of these vehicles are fitted with trackers. So if people say, look, 10:30 yesterday, I couldn't get off my drive, here's a photo, that can be cross-checked quite easily, and then the driver can be spoken to, and any repeat of that action is taken.
Okay, that's really good. I've had another resident come through with another question, which is a bit more specific. So I said I'll put a private message and I'll take that up specifically with you. So I'll take those details and pass them through to yourself.
Okay.
And then have we got somebody from the Clean Air Zone with us? We have, don't we?
Not quite, Councillor. I'm Mark Wollstonecroft. I'm the Operations Manager within Environmental Protection and Environmental Health. So I'm not representing the Clean Air Zone per se, but I can talk air quality
Okay.
however long you've got.
If you would, that would be really good, because I know one of the things that people are concerned about in Gravelly Hill is in terms of the air pollution. And I know, I'm sure you've sent me a notification through talking about the 40 UGM to the power of 3 being the upper limit. Yeah?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been looked at your statistics. I understand that it actually is technically within that, but it must be Tyburn Road must be the upper end of that limit. Yeah. And I'm assuming there can't be much headroom before they're actually breaching that limit. And I'm wondering what action can be taken to make sure we don't breach that limit, and secondly, we get that figure down as low as we possibly can.
Yeah, can I give you an overview, Councillor, for yourself and the residents? The legal limit that we're talking about is actually an annual average concentration, and the value is 40 micrograms per cubic metre. Now, what tends to happen is this value will be exceeded, i.e. 40 micrograms, over shorter periods. So say it might be exceeded in a day, it might be exceeded in a month, it might be exceeded in a few weeks. But from a legal standpoint, it's calculated as an annual average. If you ever look at the data that we put out, you'll see that you get fluctuations. You tend to get increases at the start of the year when you've got your winter months and more people are using the cars, and the climatic conditions trap the air and trap the pollution and don't allow it to disperse. And then when you get into the summer months, it tends to disperse a lot easier. There might be less traffic, and so what tends to happen is you get lower concentrations, and that's why you average it out over an annual period. And that's the legislation in the Air Quality Directive from Europe, and obviously that we've implemented in the UK. So we're talking an annual average, which is 40 micrograms per cubic metre. Now we have 2 air quality monitoring sites in the Gravelly Hill ward. These are both diffusion tubes. Both are on the Tyburn Road and they are eastbound. The first, which we call number 17, is located between Hawks Yard Road and the exit to the flyover. If you walk down there, you'll probably see it up on a lamppost somewhere. And the second one, which we've numbered number 18, that's actually located on the same stretch of road, but a little bit further on after the traffic leaves the flyover. Both are approximately 10 metres from the facade of the nearest residential property. So that will be the properties on the north side of Tyburn Road. And we've monitored the concentrations at these 2 locations going back to 2013. So I'll just give you a very brief overview. In 2013, the concentrations were slightly above the legal limit. It won't be a surprise for you to learn that the second tube site, so number 18, the one that is after the flyover, so after the vehicles have joined the Tyburn Road, is always a bit higher than the first one. So in 2013, they were a little bit over the legal limit. They peaked around 2016, 2017. The concentrations got up to 50 and 49 respectively, so quite a bit over the legal limit. In 2018, they came down to very much on the legal limit, 39 and 41 respectively. And then in 2019, they dropped down quite a bit to 34 and 35. And provisional data for 2020 suggests that they're around about 37, 38. So what it's really important to understand is taking 1 year out of that 9-year mix, it doesn't tell the whole story, and you could end up saying that 1 year's compliant and the next year isn't compliant and the next year's borderline. So when you do an analysis of ambient air pollution, you typically do it over extended periods. And for an annual average concentration, that's over a number of years, not merely for a single year. So for instance, in 2019, when the concentrations dropped down to 34 and 35, we wouldn't take the view that it's compliant now, we don't need to monitor anymore on the Tyburn Road. We would look at that conservatively, and we would take the view that, okay, that might be the start of a trend. Equally, it might just be a blip, and as such, we would need to continue monitoring. If the trend did continue, then that might be an indicator of shifting pollution levels, and that could suggest that the stretch of road was potentially becoming compliant. As it stands at the moment, we in Environmental Health feel that this stretch of the Tyburn Road is probably borderline, and it demands continued monitoring, which we are obviously going to do. I know you posed a question to me on the email with regards to HS2 and the additional HGVs running along the Tyburn Road. And it's interesting because the route that they're taking is actually takes them past them 2 monitoring sites. So what we will obviously end up doing in the monitoring is we will pick up any pollution that they add to the Tyburn Road concentrations. At a very basic level, we looked at some Department for Transport statistics, and it suggested that there were some 2,743 HGVs using the Tyburn Road on a daily basis. And what we understood from yourself is that there's potentially at maximum an additional, let's say 800 HGVs per week using the Tyburn Road. And when we calculated what the emissions are likely to be from those additional 800 HGVs, bear in mind that's spread over a week, the calculation appeared that it would only increase the total emissions by less than 1%. And if you consider where we are with the concentrations, it probably won't push it above the legal limit looking at 2019 and 2020. But if you look at the 2018 data, where it's borderline, it would obviously give us a little bit more cause for concern. So I think what we've got to do is we've got to be engaging with companies like HS2 to try to get them to do whatever they can to avoid using road transport to do the deliveries. So, for instance, if anything can go on the rail network, for instance, and I know that HS2 have considered this and may have even built it into part of their programme. I think for these big infrastructure projects, there has to be an acceptance that there will be some measure of road traffic being used. And in that instance, what we need to ensure is that they're using the cleanest vehicles possible. And I know with some of the conversations around the clean air zone and the fact that their vehicles would have to enter into the clean air zone to go to the new HS2 primary station at Millennium Point, we were pressing HS2 to only use Euro 6 vehicles, which are the latest Euro standard and obviously the cleanest diesel vehicles that they can actually do, and that they did commit to. So I feel that we got something there. But yeah, it's any additional trips on the road is obviously going to increase pollution. In this instance, it's going to be a very, very, very small amount. But that being said, we want to reduce it as much as we can.
I think the concern about it is I understand what you're saying about they're going to be using appropriate vehicles, and obviously with the effect of COVID, there's been less traffic on the roads. But from my reading of the figure, we're still very close to the legal maximum limit. And once traffic picks up to what you would consider to be normal traffic levels, once COVID restrictions stopped dropping, not easing down, and people are using the road more, we're going to get into the situation where we're over the legal limit unless we're exceptionally careful.
I wouldn't disagree with that assessment, Councillor. I think, look, when you look at the data, 2019, there was a heck of a lot of headroom because we were around about 5 micrograms per cubic metre under the legal limit. But 2020, as you say, we've had roughly around about 80% of the traffic that we did in previous years, I think, overall. And we're on around about 37, 38, which is why I take the view that this stretch of Tyburn Road, I certainly wouldn't class it as compliant and not deserving of any monitoring. I would say it is at best borderline. We need to continue monitoring, and we need to be focusing our efforts to try to drive down pollution as much as possible. Can I pick up on another point as well, Councillor? Just to finish off, please. We've done we have an air quality action plan for the City of Birmingham, and we have reviewed the air quality action plan in the last 12 months, and we are going to issue a new air quality action plan probably around about February or March. Part of that action plan is looking again at the areas outside of the city centre, which they will be captured by the clean air zone and the works that that's bringing in. And what we're looking to do is identify which other parts of the network do we feel we need to look at in more detail. And with regards to the Gravelly Hill ward, we've identified, as well as obviously keeping our monitoring sites at the Tyburn Road that I've already talked about, and keep an eye on them and obviously report on them. We're also going to be looking at another site up on Gravelly Hill North, up to 6 Ways. Now, I don't know if that is going to be a particular problem, but it's a road where it has quite high traffic flows, and it's got what we call relevant exposure within 20 metres of the carriageway. So that's where you've got residential properties quite close. And our existing model indicates concentrations close to the legal limit, so we're going to be putting a focus on there as well, and that's going to be done in the first tranche of the additional monitoring. So at some future point, Councillor, I'd be happy to come back to the ward committee and give some update on what the outputs from that air quality monitoring is. But as I say previously, you've got to give us a bit of time to get some data.
Yeah. Well, I think we were looking potentially to coming back to this later on in the year. to get some indication in terms of how things are progressing?
Yeah, I don't think we'll have enough of a data set. As I said previously, in the summer the concentrations tend to drop, and when we're monitoring for an annual average, we like to get, I think it's around about 75% of a year's worth of data. So in effect, we need to get 8 months worth. So we're looking to we'll be looking to hopefully get that data for Gravelly Hill by the end of the year, I would suggest.
Okay, I mean, I certainly wouldn't have an objection of doing one at the end of the year, but I'd sort of like to have an interim one so we can get an understanding of what the direction of travel is with it, and give the residents the opportunity to come back and ask further questions.
Yeah, that's not a problem, Councillor. I'd be quite happy to do so. Yeah.
Okay. That would be really good. Has anybody got any other things they want to mention on the A30? Because we've still got another item to go through as yet. Okay, I've got one more point here on that. I gave a postcode for the off-road parking bays to call, which is B24 8HD, and it should have been H8HP. And I think, Leslie, you're going to make a note of that. Is that right?
Yes, I've got that, Councillor.
Okay, so it's B24 8HP. Okay, so, well, thank you for the people who've asked the questions. Some questions I picked up separate. I said I picked up separately, and I'll feed back into people. And thank you for all the presenters on that section. Which then leads us on to the ward plan, which John Mole, the Community Development and Support Officer, is going to talk to us about.
Thank you, Councillor. Birmingham City's Cabinet has asked that every ward drafts a ward plan. Now, the plan should be a broad brushstroke identifying local assets and identifying the demographics of the ward. What I would state at this point is the plan, if it is effective, is never complete, as it should be a document that is adapted and amended over time. And I think the technical term for this is an organic document, basically responds to change and local need. And that's the whole idea and the ethos of what a ward plan will be. Included in the plan should be some key priorities and objectives. Now, at this point, I would add they should be tangible and realistic. It is not a document that will be the utopia of all ills, and there are obvious aims and objectives that we all want, such as improved health, greater financial income to all residents, improved education, better housing, safer communities, etc, etc, etc. But they're very broad, and we've got to be a little bit more specific. So the plan has to be realistic with its priorities and have tangible goals, which I believe the Gravelly Ward Plan actually has done. A number of priorities have been identified for the ward, including community safety, youth work, traffic calming issues, road safety and environmental issues. And I think it's particularly relevant at the moment is that you've identified health and well-being, where the plan identifies particular issues on social isolation, and obviously with the COVID pandemic, it fits in very nicely with where we're at with that. The plan also makes a particular point in identifying potential 106 monies that could be used within the ward. And this is most certainly a correct course of action for the ward plan. I've already stated that the ward plan will not bring about immediate change and act as a panacea to local services and activities at the grassroots level, but it is nonetheless a very valuable document and an asset in the ward moving forward. By documenting potential goals and outcomes, it gives a direction of travel for the ward, and then should local funding or local resources become available to the ward, you have an immediate document to refer to that identifies key priorities, enabling funded and resources to be allocated in the right areas immediately. I am conscious, however, that it's been a very long meeting, and it's been a long evening, and everyone's been staring at a small screen. That's not good for anybody's eyes. But I think the key point at this conjecture is that everyone who requires a copy of the ward plan can get one from either myself, that's John Mole at birmingham.gov.uk, Leslie Bannister, who set the meeting up, which is leslie.bannister@birmingham.gov.uk, and of course your good self. And I think the best thing at this point is if there are any questions, Councillor, I'm quite happy to answer anything that's coming my way.
Okay, there's the questions that we've had continuing to come through was, this is possibly one possibly for Doug and Mark again. Was a monitor on Tyburn Road removed in 2016? Because there's a question indicating that one might have been in terms of pollution levels.
Yeah, I'll respond to that if I may, Councillor. We had 2 air quality monitoring sites at our Tyburn Road offices at 581 Tyburn Road. So that was up past Bromford Lane. I think it's now part of the Mercedes dealership on the corner. We had an air quality monitoring station in the car park, and there was a DEFRA site that was on the grass verge on the front. Unfortunately, we had to vacate the building because it was being sold off, so we had to move our site from the rear car park, and that went into the city centre at the back of St Mark's Crescent, near the Nelson Junior and Infant School, within the clean air zone. The DEFRA one, I think that's the one that your constituent refers to, that was moved to the eastern stretch of the Ring Road, on the southbound stretch. I'm just trying to think. I think it's before you get to Big John's near the park there. So that was DEFRA's station, and they were the ones who relocated it. But the reason for it, bottom line, was that we had to vacate the building and it was being sold. Otherwise, I'd have quite liked to have kept them there.
So we've actually got 2 monitors on the Gravelly Hill stretch of Tyburn Road at the moment. Is that right?
They are diffusion tubes. They look like a test tube, and you can see them attached to lampposts.
Okay. And do we think that the 2 monitors are actually sufficient at the moment for our needs?
For that stretch of the Tyburn Road, I would suggest that they are, yes. Obviously, as I indicated before, we are looking to put some more diffusion tubes into the ward as we head up to towards Six Ways to capture the pollution levels there.
Okay, and then we've got another question in terms of vehicle noise. So I think which is an issue that people had raised with me before, in terms of people aware of air pollution, but there's also the issue of noise pollution on some of the arterial roads. And again, I think we're referring to Tyburn Road here, and people are concerned about not being able to open windows because of the continual hum of vehicles passing through.
Yeah, regrettably, I don't have as much good news on that, I'm afraid. Traffic and the noise from traffic is technically exempt from any legal action, unfortunately. The only times that you tend to get any sort of insulation, for instance, against traffic noise is when there is a change to a carriageway. So, for instance, if an additional lane is added, or maybe a new junction, or even, obviously, in the case of new roads. But for existing traffic, unfortunately, there isn't really much that can be done, and we can't deal with it under statutory nuisance from environmental health either. I'm sorry about that, Councillor.
Okay, thank you for that. We've had a question here for on the ward plan, so this is possibly one for John here. This resident saying that people in the area just want to feel it's a healthy and safe and inclusive community for children, elderly people and the disabled to feel safe again and to feel that it's their community. And I think it keeps expressive concern that the area's sort of gone back a bit.
I mean, I really support the emphasis on community safety, Councillor, but that's not my brief. At the end of the meeting, the city does have a very small community safety team. I will send you over the actual manager's name and numbers so that you can contact them direct and perhaps relate that back then to the local resident. Yeah.
Okay, and it's also again about making sure that we're safeguarding people so that people's health and safety and well-being are included. And I think some of those points are picked up on by the ward plan in a more general sense. But as John said, if people want a copy of it, by all means you could contact myself or speak to John or speak to Leslie, and we'll get a copy sent out to you.
And I think we've got to emphasise as well, Councillor, that this is a living document. This is our first draft of it. This is our first endeavour. I think as the months go by, as the years go by, it develops into something that becomes very much a local-based document so that local people can feed into it, to make certain that issues like community safety, like even perhaps the issues that have come up with Tyburn Road tonight, can become incorporated into the document, so that it's something that we can then refer back to the city and to our cabinet colleagues to say, look, this is what's happening at the local level from our local people.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that, Ben John. The last section we've got down here is urgent matters of concern. We appear to have dealt with all the questions that have come through from residents. So thank you for anybody that sent a question through. And if we've not responded to it, then please contact me separately and we'll make sure we do. Are there any of the officers or people that presented got any issues they want to flag up that they feel we've not looked at so far? Anybody wants to add on to their contributions? I'll take it now. Okay, well, can I thank everybody? Can I thank all the residents? I'm getting a bit of feedback here. I'm not sure if that's off. It could be off myself here. I thank all the residents who have submitted questions. I thank all the presenters that have come along tonight and made this, I think, a really interesting meeting. I think as a lot of the presenters have actually said, we're not able to provide some instantaneous complete solutions. We're not here to provide a perfect resolution for you immediately. We're just here to acknowledge concerns and to do what we can to improve the situation on a continuous basis. So thank you very much to everybody who's turned up tonight. I appreciate it. And good night.
Good night.
Night, councillor.
Okay, bye now.